Welcome to the launch of the 2022 Global Covenant of Mayors Impact Report, also known as the Aggregation Report. My name is Peter Haams and I'm responsible for the data management part in the Global Covenant of Mayors Secretariat. Here to my left, the first speaker is Gregor Robertson that I will introduce. Gregor is a leader and entrepreneur in politics and business who's committing to building a healthy, biodiverse world with vibrant, green, inclusive cities. Gregor served 3 terms as a mayor of Vancouver, Canada, from 2008 till 2018. Above all, and at least for this session, Gregor is the global ambassador of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. Just as a reminder, before I forget it, for people in the room, there is translation. So if you can use the headphones on channel 1, you can use it for English. Channel 2 can be used for French. Before I give the word to Gregor, I also want to welcome all the people that are following this session online. Gregor, the floor is yours.
Merci, Peter. Thank you, and good day, everyone. It's an honor to be here representing the mayors of the Global Covenant of Mayors as their global ambassador and as the former mayor on the board of GCOM, an honor to continue the work and to support the efforts of over 12,500 cities around the world, from Paris to Pittsburgh, from Accra to Adelaide. Thousands of cities and local governments are committed to reducing our climate pollution further and faster than our respective counterparts in our countries. We have their national determined contributions, and our cities are stepping up to reduce our climate pollution even farther and faster. If we do that, if we're to win this fight against the climate crisis, it must begin in our cities. Our cities are a majority of the population in the world. As we found out this week, 8 billion people in the world, and over half of them live in cities today. And the majority of our emissions, from 2/3 of our emissions to 80% of our GDP, happen in our cities. We are very fortunate to have 12,500 plus mayors representing over 1 billion people around the world who are committed to ambitious climate action and delivering change on the ground in our communities. That will be essential for us to come through this climate crisis strong and healthy and inclusive. But the path is more and more difficult every day. This year has been particularly challenging on cities around the world with the pressure coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russian war on Ukraine, which has been devastating, the extreme weather that has again stepped up to even greater impacts around the world, many of them on cities, but those climate disasters continue to mount, be very expensive, and obviously have a devastating impact on people in our communities. Inflation and financial challenges are facing cities around the world as well, in addition to the income inequality that we face. That piece around inequality afflicts cities everywhere in the world and means that more of the impacts affect those in developing cities around the world and communities that are struggling to adapt to the impacts of climate. More of those impacts are affecting women and children, people from underrepresented communities. And as mayors in our cities, we have to do everything we can to get what we call a triple word score, a win-win-win, where we deliver on our climate results, we keep our communities inclusive, and we lift up those who are most vulnerable, as well as we grow, we create opportunity, we create change that creates enterprise and opportunity for our people. These impacts, though, continue to mount, and in the face of that, we're seeing great gains made in our cities. And this is the annual impact report of the Global Covenant of Mayors, an update on the progress that our cities have made for the last year, which is impressive. And as I said in the outset of this, these improvements, these gains are farther and faster than what we're seeing in our countries. And as mayors, and we'll hear from two of our mayors on the GCOM board today, we want to go farther and faster than that. There's a very strong commitment to continue to accelerate our actions, to deepen the work that we're doing, and to make sure that we are serving our people in that way. So GCOM is all about energizing the work we're doing on climate action, making sure that it helps people on the ground and sets up our good cities for generations to come. With that, I'll close and look forward to remarks from my colleagues here and our mayors in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregor. And a lot of the things that you said make absolute sense and will be also covered during this session in more depth. Thank you for that. If we look at the GCOM Alliance, the first thing that we will want to look at is the general progress that has been made in general and specifically last year. So looking at the first chapter, we are going to cover progress despite global and local challenges. As all of the cities have experienced, there are some challenges that they have to face. Also, that was some of the things that Gregor explained. If we look first at the growing alliance, we see that more than 12,500 cities and local governments have joined the Global Covenant of Mayors. That covers more than 144 countries. Since the 2021 Impact Report, 900 new signatories have committed. If we look at the global number, we see that over 1 million people, one person in every eight, lives in a city that has committed to GCOM. If we look in more depth to the distribution of the GCOM growth since 2021, and we were quite lucky with the numbers, if you look at this graph, you see that at the top we have the European Union and Western Europe. Here we are, this session is hosting in the EU Pavillion. So we see here that since 2021, the European Union and Western Europe has contributed a lot in number of cities to the Global Covenant of Mayors. Okay. Of course, we are today here in Egypt, North Africa. If we just switch over the graph and look now at the same graph, but looking at the biggest growth in population, we see that since 2021, the biggest growth in population of new cities joining the Global Covenant of Mayors is coming from the Middle East and North Africa area. You also see that a lot of the other regions that we are covering, and we are covering most of the world, have made, in fact, considerable progress. Looking a bit further, we can look at that progress also from the point of view of the badging that cities can earn, that they then can use in their communication when they are committing to the Global Covenant. When we look at the 12,630 committed cities, that is the global number, so the more than 12,500 committed cities and local governments. When they commit, they pledge to implement policy and undertake measures to reduce greenhouse gas emission, to prepare for climate impact, to increase sustainable energy access, and track that progress towards these objectives. We clearly see here also the progress that these cities have been making in terms of badges. We have a total of 12,008 pillar badges. GCOM is working with 3 pillars. So the first pillar is in blue, the mitigation pillar. There we have 9,693 cities that have earned that badge. You also see that under mitigation, there is inventory, target, and plan. Those are the 3 steps that every city can take within that mitigation path. A second path that is already active, but that was launched later than the mitigation path, is the adaptation path to increase resilience. And there we have 2,315 cities that have received that badge. Also there we have 3 steps, and later in the presentation we will show another graph showing how much cities have earned that step with the assessment, goal and plan. Yesterday, there was also a session where we had the launch of the energy access and poverty pillar. So that pillar was announced yesterday, and it will be available to cities and launched in 2023. If we look in global, we can see in fact that almost 80% of the global covenant of mayor cities have taken concrete steps to reduce emissions, to increase resilience, or to achieve both. If we look at the situation today that our cities are facing, it is not the most easy situation at this moment. They were faced with the COVID pandemic. And then following the COVID pandemic, there were a number of other incidents, crises, challenges that they had to face. Okay? These intertwined crises and challenges reinforce, in our opinion, the urgency of the climate action. With COVID-19 still present and having an impact, additionally, there was resource scarcity, there were rising energy prices and more extreme weather events. To give some examples, which are also in the report that you can download in a PDF format, we have seen incidents in Cameroon, Bangladesh, Ecuador, where there were increases of the energy prices and big upset because of that. We saw a series of smaller emergencies having fed into this larger crisis, including energy output problems in France, Brazil, China. And then we saw extreme weather directly linked to climate change that introduced additional challenges. We saw droughts in Europe, North America. We saw hurricanes in the Caribbean. We saw hurricanes in the USA and Canada. All of these challenges are adding up and make it more difficult, or maybe they can reinforce the urgency of climate action for cities. The next speaker that I would like to introduce is Andy Deacon. Andy Deacon is the co-managing director of the Global Covenant of Mayors, and he will talk about Chapter 2 and the transition to a low carbon future.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, colleagues here in Sharm-el-Sheikh, and to those of you joining us online. So it's very clear that GCOM cities and local governments are acting to increase energy efficiency in homes, workplaces, and infrastructure networks, while also pursuing a transition to a secure, sustainable, and affordable energy sources. And this isn't just going to help lower energy bills as well as reducing emissions, but localizing and diversifying energy supplies will help to insulate urban dwellers from fluctuations in global energy prices that you can see on the slide here, helping to stabilize those prices while also building resilience to future shocks. Our data shows that at present, 38% of the population in GCOM signatory cities 38% of that population live in a city where less than half of the electricity is generated by fossil fuels. However, global renewable energy power generation has grown by more than 10% during 2022. So while cities and local governments have been progressing at pace with their emissions targets, the events of the past year add new impetus to the need for a rapid energy transition. Rising energy prices and increasing climate risk have placed unprecedented strain on governments, public services, and city residents, and they're all seeking ways to absorb these escalating costs. As the graphic shows, the average natural gas price index had been stable for 4 years, but the data for last year shows the index price quadrupling. And the impacts of that are really being felt across our cities. Next slide, please. And GCOM signatories really recognize the urgency of transitioning to a net zero future. Over 9,500 cities across the GCOM Alliance have set a mitigation target that's in line with something called our Common Reporting Framework, or CRF. That CRF alignment ensures that signatory mitigation targets are at least as ambitious as their countries' nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. Based on current targets and actions, the GCOM cities could collectively reduce global emissions now by 2.3 gigatons of CO2 equivalent in 2030 compared to a business-as-usual trajectory. And this demonstrates the commitment of the GCOM Alliance to limit global temperature rise and to work towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. And as this graphic shows, analysis of cities with an emissions reduction target of at least 40% shows that, in fact, larger cities typically have deeper levels of pledged emissions reduction. The latest 6th IPCC assessment report shows that significant emissions reduction potential rests in smaller and medium-sized cities. We have more work to do to understand what's driving this trend, but we also want to adapt our support to those cities that want to make a more ambitious commitment in the fight to tackle climate change. Next slide, and back to you, Peter.
Thanks, Andy, for that. And you mentioned the common reporting framework, and I will come back in the introduction of Paolo on that common reporting framework. The next chapter that we will present is More Cities Report on Climate Impact. This chapter will be presented by Paolo, or at least partly presented by Paolo Bertoldi. Paolo is part of the European Commission Joint Research Centre and is in charge of research activities in the area of energy efficiency. Within the Global Covenant of Mayors, Paolo also manages the scientific support to the Global Covenant of Mayors as the Joint Research Centre, and Paolo is the chair of the Data Technical Working Group. The Data Technical Working Group is responsible for the common reporting framework that was already mentioned by Andy during his presentation. The CRF, as we call it, the Common Reporting Framework, CRF is a harmonized reporting standard and guidance that allows global aggregation and regional adaptation. So that is very important. It's a very important instrument because that is the instrument, in fact, that makes this aggregation report and the aggregation of data across regions, across cities possible. Paolo will talk about the climate impact that the GCOM cities are facing. Paolo, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Peter, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to highlight the key finding of the GCOM aggregation report in relation to adaptation and resilience. Cities more and more report on climate impact on their territories through the common reporting frame. And this climate impact allows them to plan the action. So it's very important that they have solid data to target the scarce resources, financial and human, they have in cities to put the action where is more needed. And we can see different continent and nation have slightly different type of hazard impacting the cities, but we can see some common trends. For example, extreme hot temperature is a top risk across all regions, followed by extreme water precipitation and droughts. But what is important that these numbers of hazard reported has increased considerably compared to the previous year. Next slide, please. And here again, showing the high-risk hazard, which are the most important one reported by municipalities and cities. And we can see, again, extreme hot temperature being the most predominant one, followed by extreme precipitation, flood and sea level rise, and drought. And this is not just in in some regions. For example, the extreme hot temperature has been felt very much in Europe this year. City like Paris reached for the first time 40 degrees. And can you imagine the stress is put on the infrastructure and on the citizens, causing additional health impact and even death. So is a priority certainly for mayors to manage this disruption to daily life and to business and try to cope with this one at the same time plan for the future, because we know that this impact can only increase in the future, will not disappear, will stay there and will become more relevant and more impactful as the global temperature will rise due to the greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So cities are taking seriously the adaptation pillar, as we call it. They set goals. We don't have a number here as in mitigation, but it's up to the city to decide what they want to achieve with their adaptation measures that address the most important risks they face. And so we see an increase in the number of goals reported in 2022 compared to 2021. As again, as said, to do this one, they need data and local data. And the collection of data through the risk vulnerability assessment, an important component of the CRF, the Common Reporting Framework, has increased as well the plans. So once you have your target and your data, then you plan how to get there. And plans cover different sectors, different type of risk, always with the limited resources, financial and human resources that have cities that also should be highlighted. It's not an easy job, and I guess our mayor here can tell more than I know about this. Next slide, please. And since this year we have a special focus on the energy crisis, the high prices, also from the adaptation point of view, city recognize the energy sector as a critical sectors to keep the lights on, as we say, in our homes, keeping the street lighting on, heating, cooling, all what citizens need to have a normal life that is also impacted very much by the climate hazard. And in fact, in particular, the extreme temperature put at risk the supply of electricity, as well as the flooding that happens in cities may disrupt electrical lines, and the droughts, because at the moment the electricity system is very much based on fossil fuels that need a lot of water to cool down their system. Hopefully when we transition to renewables, this will change. But it's the reality that we face on the energy sectors, and cities really highlighted as a critical sectors that must kept on all the time, in particular during severe hazard and storms, for example, to assure the functioning of the emergency service and all what is needed to cope with this. So it's very important that cities address this type of sector as well as our critical sectors. And in particular, we've seen that city also highlight which are the most impacted citizens in their cities. Very often already mentioned are the poor sector of the city population, the elderly, the disadvantaged with poor housing, and very often built in flood-prone zones. And it's very important that city are doing this, address this as a high priority. Thank you very much, Peter, for this, and I leave the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you, Paolo. The next speaker, and we still remain within the same chapter, we are still talking about climate impact, but we will now go to a testimony by one of the two mayors that we have invited. And the first mayor that will speak is Councillor Anna Reynolds, was elected Lord Mayor of Hobart, Australia in November 2018. Anna has held several roles in advocacy, policy development and management, including Deputy Director of the WWF International's Global Climate Change Program. Anna is focused on various issues, including affordable houses, climate change, active transport and protecting Hobart's heritage. Anna will elaborate on her experience with climate impact and increasing resilience. The floor is yours, Anna.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on all of the amazing data that's been collected. And the data tells a very compelling story, but even more compelling is that behind all of those numbers are many, many tragic human stories in terms of, you know, deaths and injury and loss of homes and the pain of rebuilding businesses. And in the case of Australia, in the last 3 years really, we've just had incredible extreme events, and in some cases we've had the La Nina phenomena, which leads to a lot more flooding in Australia, on the east coast of Australia. And recently some places have had 100-year events, but they've had about 3 of them in the last 2 years. So entire villages have gone completely underwater, not just once, not just twice, but 3 times. And the human heartbreak of having to kind of dry out your home or your business and throw everything out and apply to the insurance company and put it all back together, only to find that 6 months later the same thing happens again. So there's some very big questions being asked in Australia. A lot of local government leaders are really on the front lines of this and are in shock. But the shock, as the shock subsides from having to deal with, help your community deal with this, there are some bigger conversations happening about whether rebuilding should be occurring, where towns have been for a couple of 100 years. And this isn't just outer suburbs. Often this is the main street of the suburb. So I met the mayor of Lismore at an Australian National Congress of Local Governments, and her main street has gone underwater completely. I think it's twice, but maybe even 3 times in the last 2 years. And so in terms of actually moving the main street of a town, that's a very significant decision, but they're having to think about that. So we've had extreme bushfires and then extreme floods in the last couple of years, and thousands of people displaced, as I mentioned, and that's happening actually right now as well. So I guess I wanted to just talk about what are some of the lessons that mayors and local governments and governments generally are learning from these experiences just in the last couple of years. I think I've got 4 sort of key lessons that I think are being learned. One is to expect surprises, that these extreme events are more extreme than people expect they're going to be. Also, that existing institutions may not be able to respond. And this is in a country like Australia, which has a very strong institutional culture, where I guess we like to consider ourselves reasonably well organised and have strong institutions around state emergency services and insurance coverage and those kind of things. Some of these institutions are really struggling to deal with the kind of extreme events. So, for example, we are now saying to our residents in Hobart, if we have an extreme fire weather day, do not expect a fire truck outside your home. It will not be there. There is no way that with certain fire weather conditions, the fire service will be outside your home. The other message is that strong and connected and organised communities are needed, and they have worked out that they need to organise themselves. So again, in northern New South Wales, which has really been hit very hard, initially they were devastated that the state emergency services weren't able to provide enough boats to provide the evacuations, that the evacuation plans were not at the scale required. But instead of, and there was a bit of complaining and people upset, but communities have quickly decided that they have to get organised and they have to fill the gap. And so it's really important for local councils to help facilitate the building of those resilient communities so that they're organised, they're connected, they know the risks and they've got plans to deal with the risks, and they're also thinking about the recovery process. And the other key thing that local government is discovering is that the federal government's recovery, rebuilding funds that will come out after a disaster are not enough to actually rebuild, particularly to rebuild to a more resilient standard. So there is a gap. There's a funding gap for local government that we're having to find. We're having to cut other programs to find to rebuild to a standard that's ready for the next disaster. So just a little bit more on Hobart and what we're doing. So our biggest risk, and we've established this over a number of years, is wildfire. We have a beautiful bushland environment around Hobart, but it happens to be we're the second driest capital in Australia. We also are on the 40-degree latitude, which means we have very strong winds, and a mix of topography and geography means that climate scientists have told us that we are an extremely vulnerable city, because not just from a bit of bushfire, but from the creation of those really extreme fire weather conditions. And that's what we're worried about. We're worried not just about a bit of bushfire, but the kind of really catastrophic day where you have high winds, low humidity, high heat, and it really creates its own weather. And these are the kind of scenarios that are really difficult to deal with, because how do you actually prepare your communities and say to them that, you know, I don't know whether we're going to be able to respond as a city. I don't know whether the emergency services will be able to evacuate the kind of at the level that is required. You know, it's a very, very difficult message to be the messenger in some ways of a bit of doom, but somehow we have to give people a sense that it's very serious and that we need to all work together. But it is the kind of extremities of the events that we're looking at are very problematic. So we're doing a lot of work. We spend a lot of money on trying to reduce fire risk in our own bushland. We have green fuel breaks that we've put in. We've done a lot of work in upgrading fire trails in the back areas of our bushland so that if there is a spot fire that starts, the fire service can get in easily and get it out before it takes off. And we also do our own fuel reduction burning program, which is about just reducing the ladder fuels and reducing the amount of fuels in the landscape. There's some debate about whether that's even worth really doing on one of those really catastrophic fire days. Will fuel reduction burns really make a difference? But I guess for the perception of the public, we have to be seen to be trying to reduce risk, and hopefully those fuel reduction burns do help. They're also, the Australian bush does need fire for its ecology, and that's what the Aboriginal community always used to use fire to ensure that the bush remains healthy. So there is a biodiversity benefit with the kind of burning that we're doing. We do ecologically sensible and well informed by biodiversity research burns. So we spend a lot of money on that. We spend probably more money than any other city in Australia on all of that bushland management. And the other really exciting program we're doing is a new community resilience project with funding from the state, federal government. We are working with some of the bushfire-prone neighbourhoods, with the University of Tasmania, with the Tasmanian Fire Service. We're going out to people almost like door knocking, but not at the emergency stage. We're really trying to build a relationship with those communities. They know they're in high bushfire-prone areas, but the research that the university has done has shown that they know they're in a high-risk area, but they actually haven't done much to do to reduce the risk in their gardens and create, put ember guards in their gutters and do all the work that they could do in their own properties. So we're trying to have not so much fire, people trying to communicate to people that you're going to have to take some responsibility for this, but you can make it fun as well. You can build a sense of community as you build your resilience to this very high fire risk. So there's things happening like one of the suburbs is having a kind of pretend evacuation event. It's kind of like a race, and families are sort of racing down to the safer area in the neighbourhood, and then they'll have a barbecue and a sort of a fun time for the kids. So they're practicing what would happen, what they might need to do in a situation of evacuation, but they're turning it into a fun community event and getting to know each other and getting to know their neighbours. So that's some of the work that we're doing locally to try and build resilience and deal with the impacts of climate change in Hobart. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Anna. Very informative, and I like very much the community-driven approach from a number of different angles that you presented. Thank you for that. Okay. The next part is about actions, and again later we will have a mayor that presents the actions that are taken in his community. Chapter 4 in the impact report is about cities are taking action, and that is also something that we see in the aggregated numbers. If we look at the actions per pillar, so the pillar were the 3 pillars that I introduced previously: the mitigation pillar, the adaptation pillar to increase resilience, and the energy access and poverty pillar. The energy access and poverty pillar is the newest pillar, was announced yesterday during the same conference, and will be formally launched in 2023. Looking at these numbers, you see that the numbers around mitigation are very high, while we can tell from the story that was told by Anna that there are also a big need for actions around adaptation. These are still lower, but it's indicated here on the slide that the number of actions per pillar is very much influenced by the time of introduction of these pillars. Cities are reporting regularly, so we will be able to catch up and present higher numbers, not only around adaptation, but as of next year we will also be able to present numbers, or at least higher numbers, around energy access and poverty, the pillar that is now launched. Before I go, first I will go to the mitigation numbers. So we see that we have more or less 190 mitigation actions that have been reported by the cities that are part of the Global Covenant of Mayors. We have roughly around 16,000 adaptation actions, and in the middle part you see actions that are covering multiple pillars. Before, in the reporting, we had a split between actions around mitigation, adaptation. That we have changed, and we now see that actions can as well affect mitigation, adaptation, and also have an influence on energy access and poverty. And you see already a number of the adaptation and mitigation actions where there is also an indication that they have in fact an influence on that energy access and poverty pillar. And these numbers will only increase in the future. 70,271 cities reported actions, and they reported in total more than 205,000 actions. If we look at what they are doing with the actions, if we look at the global numbers here, we are comparing the hazards that they are reporting in the risk and vulnerability assessment. So those are the actions that they are expecting, and those are the actions that are indicated here in dark blue. In light blue, you have the actions that they are acting on, or the hazards that they are acting on, sorry, based upon the actions that they are taking. If you look here, the actions are ordered by the acted on. You see that it mostly correspond with the actions that they expect. So that also means that the actions that they are taking are actions that they take on the actions that they are expecting. We have around more than 14,000 hazards and more than 16,000 adaptation actions that have been documented. Now I will leave the floor to George Youssef, Mayor George Youssef. George Youssef is the mayor of a municipality of Menjes in Lebanon since 2012 and involved in GCOM since 2014. He has implemented, with the help of the European Union SESMET and the European Union ClimaMet project, he has implemented a SEAP, which stands for a Sustainable Energy Action Plan, that he has implemented with an objective of a reduction of 25%, and that now is being updated, but George will probably tell us more about that plan. George will talk about the actions the municipality of Menjes has taken, and it's quite interesting because we have a lot of bigger cities within the Global Covenant of Mayors community, and here George is coming from a rather small community, but as well welcome within our GCOM community. George, the floor is yours.
Merci, Peter. Juste pour se localiser,
So just for localization, Menjes is an extreme north of Lebanon, extreme north at the border with Syria. So the objectives of the Menjes municipality, as all other municipalities, is to guarantee basic services, infrastructures, because we are in a rural area, to promote agriculture and to protect forests. We have archaeological sites. We have the only Lebanon site with 87 megalithic dolmen. We have a Roman temple. We see it in the picture here from the 1st century, and a fort and a former medieval village with the church and vernacular houses. Our natural sites are also classified as important plant area in the Mediterranean, biodiversity areas. Next slide, please. But the municipality is suffering from a lack of structures and human resources because it was only created in 2012. As I said, it is located at the extreme north of Lebanon on the Syrian border, and it is affected by the refugee crisis. You must know that in Lebanon, 30 to 40% of Lebanese population are Syrian refugees. We also have a financial crisis that hit Lebanon for 2 years. The sterling has lost over 2,000% of its value. Lebanese banks are nearly always closed, and municipality budget is not over $5,000. Next slide, please. So the municipality wanted to change these challenges into opportunities. Since its creation, they started to establish partnerships nationally and internationally with donors, with development programs, very active in Middle East and even cross-border programs in the Mediterranean area. When it started, they wanted to start with scientific action plans, and in each action plan there are goals to achieve and short, mid and long-term actions to see how to reach these objectives. In the vertical and horizontal level, the municipality took part in trainings, in capacity building, in cooperation, in sustainable development, social development, and many other trainings.
La municipalité,
The municipality, as we said, was created in 2012, and in 2014, thanks to the CESMED project, we signed the Covenant of Mayors Convention. We see that I'm signing the convention here on the picture, and another cooperation, cross-border cooperation project with the help of the Naples municipality, because they were partner of the project. We have implemented an action plan for climate and sustainability action plan. So we sent this sustainable energy action plan several times. It's been corrected by the Covenant of Mayors. It was also proofread by CESMED, and then it was finally validated by the Covenant of Mayors. This is the cover of this action plan. It includes all the data from the municipality, and in the action plan there are actions to realize, to achieve, so short, mid and long-term actions to reach our objective
nos gaz,
to reduce our CO2 emissions by 25% before to 2020.
And as I was saying, the action plan becomes a really solid document that is given to donors to unblock funding. The municipality played its role. It responded to all call to projects. And when a Lebanese municipality was eligible, we would present a project. We have also set up solar energy station. The municipality also set up an electrical grid in parallel of the national grid. All inhabitants have subscribed to the municipality grid. The municipality sells electricity but also guarantees electricity, because today the national network works only 1 hour per day. And so today we are giving electricity at least 20 hours per day, depending on the sun. And we give electricity that created jobs for the municipality, but mostly incomes. And this is very positive. We have replaced all our public lighting with LED lighting. And what was very interesting as well is that we collaborated with the Norwegians, and we established a wood briquettes and pallets factory thanks to our forestry and agricultural waste. So that helps us to protect our natural resources from wildfires, and we make this waste into briquettes and pallets, and that also helped to create a lot of seasonal work, a lot of seasonal jobs, because we need to recuperate this waste. We also created 3 full-time jobs in the factory to guarantee the good operation, and we also have a very good economic return on investment, because the factory gave back 6 to 7 times the budget that was allocated by the state. So it multiplied by 6 or 7 our budget.
installé
We have also installed in our policy to fight desertification. We need to collect as much rainwater as possible, and so we have collaborated with the IFAT fund that is present today, and we have set up a hill lake to collect 50 cubic meters of rainwater that will help at least 150 farmers to irrigate their properties, but it will also help the municipality. All around the lake, we will develop cultural and touristic activities as well. To do that, we prepared for USAID funding, and we prepared a second action plan for the development of rural and sustainable tourism in the village.
avec
Another project that we have that is funded by the EU in partnership with the University of Balamand and the municipality, We have led a reforestation campaign. During 4 years, we planted 25,000 trees, and we chose areas with a good return on investment, a good profitability. We chose pine nuts and other tree species that are very cost effective. We have also created an essential oil extraction factory. We extract essential oils and we sell them to manufacturers. In the meantime, we are organizing a second workshop for the fabrication, of laurel soaps that are known as Alep soap. So that's the famous Alep soap. It's actually laurel. And then the third action plan, the university gave an action plan for the production of forestry products besides wood. So it's not just wood, but we can also benefit from the forests without exploiting wood resources. So we have several resources in the woods, in the forests, such as the essential oil business. The municipality, in addition to all of this, also manages the water sector through Japanese funding. It created a parallel network to the national one. It joined all inhabitants to the grid 24/7. Through another funding, we also managed wastewater treatment through a UNICEF fund. And thanks to EU funds, in partnership with the COR, we also renovated all of our irrigation and agricultural road infrastructures. We also have a German funding, and we are doing geographical information systems, GIS, for all projects and infrastructures in the city. We have another ongoing project because our proposal was selected by the project Climate for Cities for the installation of a wind turbine to produce electricity during the day and the night, but the night mostly, to also produce hydroelectric energy in the lakes. Before the water goes to the farmers, we will produce hydroelectric energy, and we will also do the first pilot project in Lebanon for district heating, so collective heating that would be ensured by the municipality. And then to conclude very quickly, I will add other projects. So we are also working in the fair trade movement thanks to the European project AFCAR 2. We are also valorizing our megalithic sites with a European funding, Horizon 2020, and a partnership with the University of Geneva since 2016 until 2025. And our big pride since 2019 is we are on the tentative list of UNESCO Cultural and Natural World Heritage Site. Thank you very much for your attention.
For this overview, number of activities that you presented for the city of, or the city municipality of Menjes. In the last chapter, Andy will give an overview of the crisis as a catalyst for transformation. There are only 6 minutes left, so...
No, well understood, Peter. Thank you very much. So you've heard some excellent examples there that really show kind of hope and progress. And our report shows that while cities and local governments need to be doing more, that there is cause for optimism. And 2022 could be seen as a bit of a turning point. Recent events, whether that is those rises in energy prices as a result of the conflict crisis, whether it is in response to climate impacts, but there's a real chance to use these driving forces as a catalyst for change and transformation. whether that's on increasing energy savings, investing in renewable energy generation, adapting to climate change, or addressing energy access and energy poverty. And you've heard a few examples firsthand from local leaders delivering on the ground of how that's being done. Next slide, please. So in response to all of this data and information coming in from more than 12,500 cities now, we've shaped that together and developed 4 key calls to action. Firstly, we firmly believe that networks such as the Global Covenant of Mayors, our regional and national covenant partners, and city networks and others that we engage with can work together to really help share and exchange some of the examples of good practice that you've heard about here, and many others, and to link local leaders and their officials together. Secondly, we well recognize that there are many co-benefits from taking these kind of actions, whether those are social, economic, in creating high quality jobs in green sectors, whether there are knock-on benefits on public health, for example, from reducing emissions that would contribute to air pollution. We need to do more to both harness those co-benefits in municipal projects that are being brought forward, but also then to amplify the fact that local leaders are acting across multiple dimensions of change. Thirdly, in line with sharing best practice, we do want to increase collaboration. We've released other reports, our multi-level climate action playbook in the past few days, that identify that we need to engage at all levels of government, with civil society, academia, private sector partners and others, if we're truly to deliver transformed cities, towns and villages. And finally, we've heard a specific focus on the costs of energy and fuel prices, and well recognize that that is being felt most acutely by individual householders and businesses in their energy bills. The best way to address that is by funding retrofit and renovation of buildings, taking a fabric-first approach. And we want to do more, both to develop support mechanisms to enable local governments to do more to support their resident citizens and businesses, colleges, schools and others to retrofit and renovate their buildings, but to deliver that rapidly as an important contribution towards decarbonisation and increasing resilience. Next slide, please. So to do that, we work through a series of 5 initiatives that you see listed on the left-hand side there, and some representatives on stage here with me, as was mentioned earlier, helping to guide and steer that activity. Data and the underlying science needs to drive a lot of what we do, and it's driven the production of this report here today. There's more that we can do in that area. We've spoken separately in other pavilions at COP27 about the role of innovation, and there are programs in partnership with the UNFCCC's Global Innovation Hub and many other partners that are looking to drive forward that opportunity, and we look forward to a next in the series of the Innovate for Cities conferences next year. Obviously, we need funding to be able to deliver that, and the Invest for Cities program is seeking to both provide opportunities to further develop the project pipeline, but also to make new sources of financing available. And then we need to mobilize technical assistance, capacity and support to develop projects beyond individual action plans and have those implemented and mobilize. On top of all of that, we recognize the importance of engaging with mayors and local leaders. And so an advocacy track, Amplify for Cities, then brings citizens and policymakers together, working in the same direction towards meaningful climate action from the local level. Next slide, please. So there are a number of new initiatives. You see them on the left and the right-hand side of the slide here, mapped against each of those 5 initiatives. You can dive into the report and understand a little bit more about how all of those link together, but they speak to a number of those calls to action and priority areas and initiatives that were just mentioned, but clearly interactions that will bring them together and unite them to really energize city-level climate action. Next slide. We work with a number of partners, some of our regional and national covenants represented here with us today and online to deliver that. You see all of their logos on the left-hand side, and then a series of supporting partners on the right-hand side, city networks that help to both found the Global Covenant of Mayors, but continue to support our technical working groups, our strategic advisory committee, and in many other ways. And without their work, we wouldn't be able to capture and gather all of the information that we've presented to you here today, but wouldn't be able to drive this locally led climate action. And just to acknowledge at the top, support from both Bloomberg Philanthropies and the European Commission in co-funding the activities of the Global Covenant of Mayors Global Secretariat to support this wonderful team and to enable all of the work to happen. Thank you very much. And back to you, Peter.
Thank you, Andy. Just quickly closing, because we are slightly running over time. I would like to thank all of the speakers of today. I would like to thank everybody that participated to the creation of the impact report. I would certainly like to thank all of the regional and national covenants that are managing all of those cities. And at last and most important, I would like to thank all of the cities and the local governments that are part of the Global Covenant of Mayors. Thank you and see you next time.